We've now got 3 speakers, single service. I know that's how they're described in the program, but we've got the benefit of Commodore Eric Young from Navy, and then a combination of Brigadiers Andrew Moss and Mark Armstrong from Army, and Tony Hindmarsh from Air Force. I've left it to these gentlemen to work out how they're going to do this, but we've got a little bit of time, but we do need to get after this, and then we can hear from a health perspective as well, because I think that's an important dimension to factor into this before we break for afternoon tea. So, Eric, thank you very much.
It's a subtle way of saying hurry up. It's great to be here, everyone, and to hear the passion in the room. If I can start, whether you have previously served or continue to serve, to thank you for your service. Whether it's 1 day, 20 years or 40 years, whether it's full-time or on a spectrum of part-time, you've done something more than most Australians will ever do, and I don't think we spend enough time thanking you for that service and recognising the sacrifices that our families make to enable that service. When you finish your full day work in a suit and come home and have a quick dinner with the kids and log onto the computer and do 3 or 4 hours of work as a reservist, or do that on the weekend, it's lost on some people how much effort that takes and how much sacrifice that takes from the family to do that. So thank you for that. For us this morning, you will have heard from the CDF and others around the DSR. And what does that mean in terms of part-time service for Navy? It means that we need to create mass quickly. We don't have, and I've heard this morning a lot of potentially negative commentary. I think Army does a pretty good job. Certainly from where I sit, you have a contingent workforce. You have a framework to employ those people, both ab initio and to transfer. We don't do ab initio, apart from some specialists and a very small cohort of maritime trade operators. We don't have a true contingent workforce, and we don't have the ability to create mass quickly. When the DSR talks about what some of those scenarios might look like for us, we need to be able to reinforce some of our platforms quickly. We need to be able to scale up our headquarters. We need to be able to do battle damage repair or additional maintenance activities quickly that we don't have a workforce for. When it comes to some specialised workforces like cyber, for those that have worked in industry before, there are not enough people in society to meet what industry needs, what ASD needs, what defence needs, and what everyone else needs. And so the only way we can do that is by different ways of thinking about what reserve service looks like and partnering with industry. Some of the challenges that we have at the moment, I'm Director General Navy People, so I look at our workforce through a total workforce lens, but I don't own reserve allocation of days. So my job is to make sure that I have the right people in the right place at the right time to support Chief of Navy, CPERS and CDF, and that works for the CERCAT 6 and 7 workforce, but I have no say in the allocation of reserve days and where that goes. So there's no alignment of effort, and so when I heard General Tomei talk about the clarity of purpose for TUDIV, that's excellent, but there's no clarity of purpose for the Navy Reserve workforce at the moment. At the moment, you serve as a CERCAT 6 or 7, you have a mate when you transition, you do some great project work where you want to for something that you're interested in, but we don't assign that to that focus. And so DSR gives us a once-in-a-generation opportunity to focus that effort where it's most needed. So some of the other challenges that we have in Navy, just general communications. I think that's probably common for most reserve workforces, but because we don't have a set structure, the communication becomes even more challenging for us, and ForceNet's not the issue. So how do we engage with that latent capability that's out there, that CERCAT 2 and CERCAT 3 workforce? You can see the numbers up there. We have about 6,600 people in that CERCAT 2 to 5 workforce. We only engage about 1,500 of those. And the vast majority, about 1,000, are CERCAT 3. So that's non-multi-year ongoing reserve service. So we're not leveraging that latent capability at the moment. And the ability for us to even understand what we have in each region is quite limited at the moment. For 2 reasons. 1, the general communication, but 2, as soon as that person leaves permanent service and they start acquiring all these additional skills, we're not tracking all those additional skills and what that can potentially bring back into the service, which is really critical for us. One thing that we've tried to do, and we welcome the strategic review of the reserves, and I think that's going to be really important for us to achieve the DSR outcome, but we've been working a couple of years now. I think you heard last year about the startup of the trial on our regional reserve centres. So we have a trial happening at the moment at HMAS Morden here in Brisbane and one at HMAS Encounter in Adelaide. And the general concept there is to provide some kind of framework, some kind of local framework to better engage with that CERCAT 2 to 5 workforce, to understand the capability, to try and get them to render either a higher level of CERCAT service or more service, and to be able to better coordinate that. The focus up front for the trial has been really around the high-risk weather season, and they've done some great work in Brisbane with Mark's team. Mark's been really great in providing some training for some of those people to do the high-risk weather season. But where the Regional Reserve Centre has the ability to expand for us across the country is to have a concept of shadow ships companies, shadow headquarters. So when we talk about those potential DSR outcomes of reinforcing ships companies, doing maintenance, doing battle damage repair, then if we leverage that latent capability that's in location, we have the ability, with a structure, with days allocated, we have the ability to quickly bring someone on and better coordinate for maintenance periods, again for battle damage repair, and for me in Brisbane, a really critical one will be shadow headquarters. When we need to scale, we need to support better not only our fleet command, but joint operations command. At the moment, again, it's done in a haphazard, short notice way. In the Navy sense, we try and get those reservists on. If we had a structure in place, again, with a hierarchy, with days allocated, we did some additional training in location here with one div, we would have a ready-made headquarters ready to scale quickly if we needed to. So the opportunity for us in the reserve review is immense. We're coming from the lowest baseline. I think Army do it well. I think Air Force do their model better than we do. We've got the ability in this reserve review to take the best of breed from what we've learnt, not only what we currently do, but of course all of the experience in the room. And I look forward to seeing the DRA's submission to the Strategic Reserve Review. But for us, there's a couple of things I think we can focus on specifically in Navy. One is that concept of training. And for me, the ability to keep people contemporary in their skills, to bring them back on for a period of time, and whether that's in a specialist sense or whether it's in like a headquarters sense for joint operational planning, so those generic skills, but keeping them contemporary in some kind of minimum standard so that we can bring them on quickly is really critical for us. The bit that I don't think any of us have been able to solve, and we've been leading a CERCAT 4 trial over the last 12 months on our Maritime Trade Organisation, and that's worked really well. But even the CERCAT 4 doesn't give us the force assurance. And I think the force assurance bit for all of us is going to be really, really critical. If we're building structures in the future for different contingencies, we need a minimum amount of that capability. We need to be assured we're going to create enough mass to achieve the things we need to. So how do we achieve that force assurance? Now that bit's tricky. I think there's some things we can do. I believe that there'll be some legislative requirements in how we work with industry. And that's probably my last point, is our partnership with industry becomes really critical here. Again, I use the cyber workforce as an example. I don't think there's enough people available to achieve everything we're trying to achieve. There's a bit of fratricide at the moment with what ASD is doing, with what industry is doing, with what others are doing. But in my mind, better partnerships with industry, better ways of working gives the opportunity to leverage that entire workforce. So in my future vision, I could imagine someone almost like the Army Reserve ad with the suit, with the Army uniform underneath. You're wearing a suit for most of the year. You're doing the minimum requirement training through the year. At some point, as we transition in that Joint Operations Command, transition from competition to crisis and heaven forbid conflicts, there's a legislative trigger that allows us to have the idea where you take your suit off, you're now in uniform doing offensive cyber operations full time, because if you don't do that, the whole country's going to fall down. So probably enough for me. I'll hand over to Tony. And thank you again for your service.
What I'm going to talk about briefly today is these 4 points, but what I've also been asked to talk about is the role of the Military Workforce Design Division in VCDF Group. General Stoddart asked me to talk about that because it's the sister division to the new Military Personnel Division in CPERS. As background, Tony Hindmarsh, I'm Director General Workforce Design and Reserves. I am a reservist, I'm CERCAT 5. I work more than 200 days a year. I work in Canberra and I commute every week from Kiama to work in Canberra. So I understand what it's like to be a reservist working full time. Okay, looking at these 4 points, and I'll come back to the first one right at the end. Similar scheme of approach in Air Force to Navy. We don't have ab initio recruits other than small groups of specialists. So we don't have a rapid expansion capacity at the moment. We took it away a number of years ago because it was too expensive. With respect to increasing the opportunities for reservists to render service, we learnt an enormous amount during COVID about how we can work more flexibly. The biggest obstacle to us working flexibly is the mindset of our own people in Air Force. If we can get people to think differently, we can use more reservists wherever they reside. For example, we're about to stand up a new project using about 80 reservists in their local areas to help with recruiting. So they're not going to move, that they're going to become recruiters in their local area supporting DFR. That's a great use of a flexible service. The challenges in recruiting and retaining reservists, they are enormous. You've talked a lot about it today. The challenges there are, in the main, every reservist is different. Most reservists want something different. That's where we're highly reliant upon the work that's going on in JSSD and then the strategic review of reserves, because we need to coalesce around a new approach to reserves. My personal view, the Suakin review back in 2011 to 12 came up with a lot of initiatives. The department did not deliver on those initiatives. Therefore, we've not made the progress we should have made. Now, I'll circle back to the first point. The division that I'm standing up in VCDF group at the moment is looking at designing an integrated force based on a total workforce system approach to deliver DSR outcomes. We will be aligning average funded strength, reserve service days to capability priorities. We will be designing in the reserve component. Now, this then directly comes to what Eric just talked about. If we're designing in the reserve component, we have got to have assured service from the reservist. It's not optional. So the question then becomes, how do we get the assured service? And if we can't get the assured service, I've got to design out the reserve component, because we cannot have a design which is reliant upon a wing and a prayer to be populated. So this work that VCDF group is going to be doing is incredibly important. Now, people were asking before, what do we know about retention? My area in VCDF group, and it's my area now as well, we know what the retention points are in the ADF. End of year of service 4, end of year of service 6, end of year of service 10. They are the key separation points for CERCAT 7. And Mossy will talk about this shortly, about what Army is doing about serving on. We've got to come up with a scheme for the 3 services where we can get our CERCAT 7 people, if they choose not to serve on as CERCAT 7, to serve on as CERCAT 3, 4 or 5 at those key separation points of year of service 4, 6 and 10. Now, there's no mystery about those years of service. The first 2 are the end of the initial periods of service. Year of service 10 is linked to entitlement to long service leave and also a few other factors in life around things such as a second career stage, people entering into families or wanting greater locational stability. We know this. What we've got to do is come up with the solutions to get people to either serve on a CIRCAT 7 or serve on a CIRCAT 3, 4, 5. Once more, that's where this strategic review of reserves is so incredibly important, because if we're not successful in attracting people at those points, particularly for Navy and Air Force, slightly less so for Army, we will have an ageing reserve force, because Navy and Air Force reserves are largely populated by superannuated people who are continuing to serve in reserve service. We don't have the young people coming through. We have a proportion of younger people, but not the size of the population that we need. So this is where this new move to the One Defence People system is not just some other change. This is the biggest change that I've seen in personnel management in Air Force in the 43 and a half years I've been associated with Air Force. This is massive. DPE failed for a variety of reasons, quite clear cut. I know why, I won't go into it here. We've got to make this change, the One Defence People system, work, because to me, this is how we also get a much better reserve capability as well. I'll call a halt there. If there are any questions, we'll take them later.
Brigadier Andrew Moss, DG of the Career Management of Army. Unlike Tony, who spoke before me, I've got actually limited exposure to the reserves until the current role, apart from employing them operationally, either in SOCOM or in Headquarters 1st Division. So I have a true understanding of the capability that's delivered at the pointy end, and not just as a clearance diver, but in an Army context. So I'd like to say thanks for your service as well. Today, as you'd expect, we're nested across the services, but also nested with CDF. And for me, that comes to the comment around mass that was linked to the DSR. I'm not going to say the why, that's been described really well today. But what I am going to talk about is why mass is important from a career management perspective. The first one, and it's been raised before, is that we're competing for that workforce. So when I think about mass, I don't think about mass just as what can be achieved within Army or within Defence. I think from a national perspective, and to achieve mass, I need to understand that it's potentially at the cost of something else. So for me, a reserve solution to achieving mass actually is a brilliant solution, because we're sharing that workforce and energising it and optimising where it needs to be at point of time. So the other part I'd say about mass is I need to be able to not only retain but also generate. And it's the retention piece that's interesting for me. And when I think retention, I don't think of retaining in CIRCAT 7 or the full-time workforce. I think of the part-time workforce when I think of retention. And so for me, that's a shift in mindset. And when I think about how we achieve that mass, I talk about those three things you can see on the board. One is mindset. One is process and policy, and that's been really well spoken to today by Major General Laidlaw and Rear Admiral Plath for policy and process. But then there's organisational design. So you can have the right mindset, but if you don't put things or frameworks around it, people will move and the mindset might shift. So the changes that we're doing in the Defence People system, I think, are critical, because it forces a process or function or structure that will ensure that it will survive contact. Now, when I say mindset, how do I prove that? Well, when I look at these numbers on the board, I don't say Army is 27,000 people. I say Army is 61,000 people, because that's actually the capability that we can bring to bear if we harness it. And so you'll see down the bottom that we've got a whole heap of latent capability that was referred to by Eric when he was talking in Navy about latent capability. Well, we have it too in Army. And currently, let's say I've got 13,000 people in CIRCAT 2 and 3. At the moment, we're only harnessing about 1,500 of those people. And I think we've got opportunity to do more. And so if I take us to the next slide, We've currently got a process which is part of the Serve On campaign, and it's about choosing your own path. And it was described by Tony before. Everyone might have a different idea or different way that they provide reserve service. And so this is trying to capture that through the people who are in that latent bit down the bottom in CIRCAT 3. So you'll see some of the things we've done in the first part of the campaign is made a significant amount of phone calls, over 2,000 to reach out to those personnel to see if they can come back and provide a form of service. We've contributed 22 transition seminars just this year to touch base with those people who are looking to transition from CIRCAT 7 to another mode of service. So what has that realised? Well, we've seen about 1,700 people who are now providing service that might otherwise not have done so. So that's a 28% increase from last year. So we do and we are seeing benefit, but there's also potential risk. So we're going to give opportunity to people to do things that better suit their lifestyle, but that might mean that they don't serve in the more traditional modes of reserve service. So they might not transition to CIRCAT 5, but in my mind, as long as they're serving, they're still generating that mass, but it's something that we do need to understand and manage. And I'll give you 3 quick vignettes to close off so you get an idea of how Serve On might be working. I have a lady who works in Perth, Vivian. She's married to Greg. Now, Vivian works in BHP full-time. Vivian's got 4 kids, 4 daughters. One's a national gymnastics person who, as you imagine, has to travel all around Australia. It's very hard for her to parade on a particular night to achieve an effect, but she's an incredibly competent middle management person who, as a major, can contribute doing work in Perth at a time of her choosing. And she does so, and she's producing great effect. I have a private, Cameron. He worked in 6RR as a soldier, decided he wanted to improve academically, transitioned to CIRCAT 3 and is doing academic studies in computer science. In fact, leading towards a cyber solution. But he still wants to do stuff when he's on academic break, and he's doing it at 6RR, continue to serve with the people he used to serve with and he has a relationship with, which is fantastic. Now, will he be a CIRCAT 5 person in the future? Probably. As he gets a different mode of lifestyle and he transitions to a more stable understanding of what his work life is, and there might be a career path for him in cyber. So I see opportunity for him. And then there's Tom. Tom lives on a farm. He likes to raise cattle. He had to retire because he hit CRA from the regular force. But that doesn't preclude him from still serving, but he's remote. So he's doing a lot of project work for us remotely on his farm in the middle of nowhere, but he's got access to a computer and he can work for another 5 years plus after. So that's how we see Serve On working for us to help generate mass. And I just wanted to give you an insight to what we're doing around the CIRCAT 3 workforce. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brigadier Moss. My name's Mark Armstrong. I'm the Commander of 11 Brigade. I'm just going to talk very briefly today just on behalf of Brigadier Michael Kalms, who's about how the Director General Reserve's Army role has evolved this year so far. Brigadier Kalms took on the role this year and posed the question that's listed on the first line in the slide. What's the future of this role, given some things that have changed in the context, much of which has been discussed today, the raising of Headquarters 2nd Division to become a functional command again, the work happening in the future workforce space within Army and across Defence, and at that time the looming DSR, because it hadn't been released at the time. And it just so the question was, what does this role, where does it fit in, what can it contribute more given the current context? It also recognises that the 2nd Division, whilst the preeminent part, I think you described it as, sir, of the Army Reserve, isn't the whole Army Reserve. That there's a third or more than a third of the active Army Reserve outside of the 2nd Division across all of our formations and units, particularly 17 Brigade, 6th Brigade and others. So what Brigadier Kalms agreed with the then Deputy Chief of Army, General Fox, was that the role would evolve, and part of that evolution would be a name change to become now known as Director General Workforce Integration. And this recognises that to give a broader voice to what the total workforce can contribute across Army's preparedness and people capability system. Noting that since the DSR, there's been some changes, and the Army operating system will be updated in the coming months to reflect the changes being driven by the DSR, including what we've heard from about the Chief of Personnel side. So an evolution, and seeing this role now not just being a voice of the reserve, but of the broader workforce, and assisting all of the teams in Army headquarters in considering and contemplating what the total workforce can contribute across all of the activities and lines of effort that are happening, and there are a lot. And the one that's been the focus, particularly the last month or two, has been assisting in the establishment and the early phases of the Joint Reserve Working Group, which is a pay and conditions input that will be provided to the broader DSR. So Mike and his team have had a leading role in that, and it's in its early phases. But it's one of the key learnings from that, and we've heard it a few times already, is that when it comes to total workforce and reserve in particular, that it's rare that one size fits all. There's no single solution. The challenge is how to develop and offer multiple solutions to appeal to the widest group possible. So that work is underway in earnest at the moment, and that Joint Reserve Working Group, the next phase of that will see workshops around the country with serving reservists as a part of the input to that. So that's all the points I was going to cover. I'll call the others. I think we've got some time for questions now of the group. I'll call the other presenters back up to answer questions as they come up. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mark. I did want to allow a little bit of time for questions. It's a lot of ground's been covered by our four presenters in the last half an hour or 40 minutes. So are there any questions from the floor, or indeed through Slido? I'll canvass some and direct them as best I can. So, Del?
Thank you. I just wondered when we're doing the rounds of reservists and trying to find out what they want. I spoke briefly about when we were talking about Suakin back in 2010 or whatever year it was then, that when I interviewed female reservists, they had a different perspective of what they wanted and needed to the male reservists, particularly around superannuation. And I wonder whether it's possible to weight the answers or responses from female reservists versus male reservists when you're conducting the surveys.
I'll answer this question on behalf of Mike Kalms, because he's actually running the survey. The intent of the survey is to get mixed demographics in all of the groups, and to try and target groups which include people who have yet to leave but may be leaving, and people who have recently left. Because one of the flaws of the Suakin research was asking people who had already left what they would like, whereas what we're trying to do with the reserves is to refresh it and find out what would induce people to serve on as reservists. So we're trying to have a more nuanced approach this time. And I can only say that it's quite interesting. You may have been tracking in the news about consultants, but amongst this group of people who are doing the surveys, we do have a group of very well-credentialed consultants who've set up the questions and are doing the actual surveys. So it is being done incredibly professionally.
Thanks, Tony. I will just take a couple of commentaries here on, in particular, actually, no, some more questions from the floor initially. A couple of questions here on Slido, but are there other questions from the floor?
If war breaks out and thousands of people want to sign up to defence, are you ready?
I'll answer this question from an Air Force perspective, then I'll slide to the back as well. From a DFR perspective, the new contract has surge capacity written into the contract. The previous one didn't, and that's one of the advantages we want. Now, depending upon the scale that you're talking about, we would have to radically change the way we do recruiting if we were to go to that scenario. But within the new contract, we do have surge capacity that we didn't have previously.
Tony's talked to inflow with recruiting. I'll talk to inflow with training. So certainly from an Army perspective, we're currently reviewing how we structure our training system so that it can be scalable and adaptable to be able to support that sort of inflow.
And the same, our recruiting numbers are about 50% of what they need to be at the moment. Our training system is now based on our targets, so we have a significant ability to upscale if we need to.
This is a question of seeking some clarification from the three services. I understand the rationale, and it's a very important one, in trying to attract people who left CERCAT 7, gone on to CERCAT 2 or 3, to come back and provide active reserve service. But I don't get the sense in either of the three speakers have spoken about that we're trying to do the same for reservists who have left CERCAT 5 and gone on to CERCAT 2 or 3.
I can absolutely assure you, sir, that is a focus. So regardless of what CERCAT you were previously, if you're a CERCAT 5 person, currently the Serve On campaign is targeting anyone in CERCAT 2 or 3 to bring them on to CERCAT 5 or CERCAT 7. It's agnostic. Yeah, so agnostic, sir.
I might just add to that. We've been using ForceNet for a long time to try and leverage our CERCAT 2 and 3 workforce. It's been to limited benefit. OAP, what's it stand for, Mossy?
One Army dot potential, sir.
Yeah, so we've got a software solution that we've been trialling that is a better way of connecting CERCAT 2 and 3 to jobs. And it's only been going for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, I think.
That's right, sir.
Yeah, we already have in one brigade achieved 80 people who are serving. So we've had, in terms of better connection to that workforce and then being able to connect them to work and then get them onboarded is much more successful. So it's a bit of an ICT software approach to a latent workforce that's keen to work, and we're just going to keep developing those opportunities.
Thanks, everyone. Any other questions from the floor? Yeah, we've got one over here. And we might need to wrap it up and move on.
Craig Gibbons, Air Force. My understanding is there is yet to be, or maybe there's been one ServOp D contract in the history of the ADF. We have a number of technical airmen leave Air Force that have all the licenses to maintain aircraft, similar to the Navy problem that was mentioned earlier. They go to Boeing, Northrop Grumman, etc., literally work on the same aircraft in a polo shirt, yet they're not allowed to return and work on the same aircraft in uniform because they lapsed their ADF license. That sounds like a pretty easy win from a ServOp D model, and I hear that we're trying to, encourage people to, share resources between ADF and industry. That obviously works outside of career management. That's more like DG logs of every service, and probably the air commanders, forces commander, etc., who look after the operational worthiness of the asset. What kind of discussion is actually occurring outside of career management with those operational units to say, yeah, why aren't we working closer with industry and actually having some of these ServOp D contracts enacted?
Okay, from a ServOp-D perspective, there have proven to be a number of legal problems around what was originally conceived in the ServOp-D construct, because the original construct was about each employer paying for the other person. That has proved extremely problematic. There are other means to achieve the same outcome, so I'm puzzled why these people couldn't still be serving CERCAT 5 if they wanted to, because the type of service is separate to the licensing issue. Probably better if we talk offline about it, because I'm struggling to see why there's a problem using the current mechanisms that we've got.
Is that working? From a Navy perspective, similar, we've found we don't need to use ServOp-D. We're achieving the same effect. So through our National Naval Shipbuilding Group, there's a dedicated area there that looks at outplacements. So we've got lots of outplacements with our force support units, FSUs, and through our CASG and NSSG teams, and we're doing that quite regularly.
Hey, thanks all. Any other questions from the floor? General Brereton might make this the last one, I think.
Probably more a comment than a question, and it's addressed to the non-car key speakers mainly, but we heard a couple of references to assured service. I don't believe you can build a reserve workforce model based on assured service, short of call-out. If the contingencies are such that you need people, then you resort to the call-out mechanism. Short of that, the reserve works on a force generation basis, and General Tomei can correct me on the more recent figures, but if you want people, you'll get 1 in 10 in days, 3 or 4 in 10 in weeks, and 9 out of 10 in months. But I don't believe you can build a voluntary reserve workforce model on a system of assured service.
Experience there, I think, and obviously, as Tony indicated, that's a key nub around which further work will evolve. Couple of Slido questions or comments. Bill Sowry, who's doing a lot of work on the current mobilisation piece. He notes Suakin did survey current serving reservists very extensively back in the day when it was being devised on what they would like as service incentives. At the time, it was the largest survey of its time with over 8,000 responses. We had an earlier comment from the DRA President New South Wales, Graham Fleeton, commenting on the extraordinarily short period of time he managed to achieve from flash to bang in terms of getting people enlisted. And I've lost the detail of that comment in the Slidos, but it was there. Here we are. When he established 2 ARU, Army Reserve Recruiting Unit, I think was a, yeah. Another comment, 1 day enlistment process, 12 psych and med personnel, I assume he means there, under command. In 3 years, we enlisted an average of 1,900, which included university regiment prospects. And there was a comment there about the implementation of the ERP, makes it potentially harder to employ CERCAT 3 members due to a lack of flexibility, rank and location, and requirement to find an APN or create a position. That seems to be at odds with a more agile, quote unquote, approach to service, which is probably a fair comment. We'll wrap that one up.